Okay, top 3 cryptids that come to mind. Go. Okay, let me guess. Bigfoot, Loch Ness, Mothman? At least that's what I thought. But I wanted to specifically discuss unusual characters from the southeastern region of the United States. And it is interesting to me how often Bigfoot does come up when discussing cryptids. I guess it's just the most prominent. Dates back maybe the longest time ago. But it's interesting how multiple states seem to have some sort of Bigfoot variant. I don't know. Maybe it's the easiest to, create a hoax for, to create, large footprints for, to buy a costume for, create a costume for. And speaking of which, let me take you down to East Texas, specifically the Piney Woods area closer to Louisiana, and there is the Caddo Lake. There's actually a movie, I think it's literally just called Caddo Lake, but it has Dylan O'Brien in it. It's a pretty good movie. It's like a weird, this isn't really spoiling anything, it's like a weird time loop situation going on. So I don't know, there might be multiple myths and lore associated with this region, but when I was researching, I came across the Caddo critter, which is a Bigfoot creature, basically, and apparently it has origins back to the 1960s. There is a man named Charlie Gant who recalled seeing a bipedal Bigfoot-esque creature on a late July night in 1964. And, with these cryptid sightings, it's usually eyewitness reports that, get reported on in the paper. They reported his eyewitness account in the Abilene paper, and other testimonies in the area that described a creature around 7 feet tall and 4 feet wide, covered in hair. So obviously a large creature. And, people were saying possible explanations being black bears, wayward yaks. In adjacent towns, Haskell and Halley, there were claims of a similar creature being sighted. So then, then you got the Howley thing, or the Haskell Rascal, and that sort of thing. And there wasn't really much I could find specifically with those, but there were 2 teenage boys, which are so reliable usually, but they described hitting an ape-like man in the woods with rocks. They described his arms as hanging down to his knees. And they actually ended up leaving to get rifles, coming back, and they didn't end up actually hitting it, but their shots scared the creature off. These critters, these things, were kind of attributed to livestock attacks in the area at the time. And there's actually a Texas Tech geologist, Dr. Frank Councilman, who claimed that the Haskell thing, the Caddo critter, was nothing more but an ocelot. Yeah. An ocelot is a relatively, compared to a 7-foot bipedal creature, it's a pretty small wildcat. So, I don't really know how that would be the culprit for a bipedal creature. A lot of the accounts of this creature, or these creatures, are from newspaper reports from the 60s and the 70s. And obviously there's potential for misidentification. Probably not an ocelot though. Hoaxes and, just human memory And then when you have someone claiming something, then people might be like, oh, actually, I did see something like that. Keeping in the same piney woods region, there is the Big Thicket National Preserve, and this isn't really a cryptid. Well, this isn't a cryptid. It's a road, but there is a legend, the Bragg Road Ghost Light of Saratoga. That's in this Big Thicket National Preserve. So there's a stretch of road that was originally the site of a railroad track that was part of the Santa Fe line from Bragg Station to Saratoga in 1901, became obsolete in 1934, and the line was removed. This stretch of road is still there, and there have been reports of lights being spotted at certain times of the night. It's commonly thought that there was a railroad worker who was decapitated in an accident and is just wandering down the road with the light searching for his head. And, you know, obviously this isn't anything new. We've all heard of the headless horseman and that sort of thing, and a headless ghost or apparition isn't anything crazy, but it's just one of those things that it's like, what's happening with the light? You know, there's even, if you look up photos, there's even a sign that they put describing the ghost road, and they just have some history. And it is creepy at night. Like, it'd be creepy being in the woods and you just see this light. But I just thought I'd mention that as an unusual thing that I came across. We're moving on to Arkansas and the southwestern town of Folk. Now, once again, Bigfoot creature. But I find this one interesting to me because there was a film based off of this legend. The Legend of Boggy Creek. This film was actually a mockumentary style based off of accounts of this folk monster, and it was released in August 1972. Now, this story, or the eyewitness accounts of this monster, were reported in the Texarkana Gazette and the Texarkana Daily News. And journalist Jim Powell covered the story in May 1971, and his reporting was actually the first time folk monster was used. And after he published, the Associated Press and the United Press International picked up the story, and it was spread throughout newspapers in the US. The most popular witness accounts are from Bobby and Elizabeth Ford, reported in May 1971. They actually filed an official report with the folk constable and Miller County Sheriff's Office. And Elizabeth claimed she had seen a large hairy arm actually reach through their screen window of their home, and Bobby chased it away. I also saw one retelling that claimed Bobby was accompanied by two other men and they shot at the creature and saw red, distinct eyes. And this was kind of confusing, but I saw that Bobby claimed he was also attacked sometime after the initial attempts to shoot the creature. So I guess it came back for more, and after the police were involved, there were strange tracks described as only having 3 toes and claw marks on their front porch. And as you can imagine, after this story broke, this created a ripple throughout the folk backwoods, and there was sort of a monster craze in this area where several people started coming forward with their accounts. And later, because Again, this happened in May, and later in June, there were actually tracks with a footprint that measured somewhere between 12 to 14 inches in length in a local soybean field near Boggy Creek. And a similar thing with the Caddo critter, how they had this geologist give an opinion. Apparently, there's an archaeologist, Frank Shambach, maybe I'm not saying that right. I'm so sorry, Frank, with peace and love if you're even still alive. But he was from the Southern State College, and he actually examined a plaster cast, because I guess he wasn't actually brought on site or anything, but they had taken a plaster of the print, and he was able to examine it, and he was basically like, yeah, this is definitely a hoax. Because an immediate red flag was that the creature was just described as an ape, a mammalian creature, right? That would indicate 5 toes. So why does the footprint only have 3? After this, there was also some mischief that occurred in the area. 3 men by the names of L.H. Harvin, Floyd Thomas, and Robert B. Williams were fined $59 each for reporting a fraudulent monster attack. They had claw marks on them, but they had blood under their fingernails, so basically they were just attacking each other, I guess, and they were like, we should say that the creature attacked us. And again, all this went down in 1971, and that movie was made in 1972, released August 1972. And actually, there's an establishment in Folk called the Monster Mart that was established in 1983 that serves pizza and souvenirs. I'm not entirely sure if it's still functioning as it was when it opened, but I believe there still is something dedicated to the folk monster in that area. Okay, so now we're moving on to Louisiana, and this one might be my favorite on this list, actually. It's the Rougarou, and this is Cajun folklore. A little background. This actually originated in the 16th century with medieval French folklore, and at the time, the French called werewolves, they called them loups-garous, and these loups-garous were scapegoats for crimes. And again, I'm assuming that would be things like livestock attacks and, maybe murders. A little background: in the 1600s, colonists from France settled in a region of northeastern North America, which they named Acadia. And this area now includes Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island in Canada, as well as parts of northern Maine, and their dialect became known as Acadian French. And in the mid-1700s, the British had control of the region and essentially exiled French-speaking Acadians, and it was referred to as the Great Upheaval. And some of these exiled returned to Canada, and a large portion of them actually made their way to Spanish-controlled territory of Louisiana, bringing their werewolf or loup-garou legend with them. This rougarou is described as a man with a wolf or a dog head. And this rougarou cryptid is distinct from other cryptids because it is commonly described as a human under a spell. And there are different avenues of becoming a rougarou. So French Catholic communities of Louisiana were adamant with practicing Lent, the period of fasting before Easter. And so, if a person were to fail to observe this rule and swayed from their religious obligations of going to confession and mass and avoid eating meat on Fridays, they would fall victim to this curse. And as you can imagine, this legend was spread to, children to enforce the idea of punishment, of not, upholding their religious practices and that sort of thing. And so I think it's interesting how these legends, they spread, how these legends are kept alive. And the second avenue that I found was someone would be cursed from witchcraft. You crossed a traitor or a Cajun faith healer, a treater, if however you say treater in French, traitor, someone who would help the ill and injured in the bayous in the 18th century, or someone who practiced hoodoo or voodoo. Those unfortunate enough to end up on, that person's list, I guess. And number 3 avenue of becoming a rougarou is surviving a rougarou attack. You'd be cursed for, the rougarou curse lasts for 101 days, where the person will transform into the rougarou at night, and in the day they are depicted as a sickly, vulnerable human, and they're sworn to secrecy about their condition. If someone sees their transformation or questions them and figures it out, the person is permanently stuck in this cycle of transformation. And I saw that the curse can be broken by attacking a human and drawing blood through biting or scratching. So I guess you're just passing it around. And I also saw this tidbit of information, which I thought was interesting. Place 13 small objects on the ground near an entrance, like a doorway you wish to safeguard or something like that. Apparently, the creature loses the ability to count past 12. I don't know, it'll get confused and preoccupied counting all the objects and keep recounting until the sun comes up, and obviously it'll transform and flee. But I'm like, 13 objects. Is it just 13 because 13 is like a superstitious number, or what's the deal? I don't know, but I thought that was interesting. And what I think is also interesting is, I mentioned it before with the folk monster, but that there was a restaurant souvenir shop dedicated to it. But with the rougarou, there's a rougarou fest that occurs every weekend before Halloween in Houma, Louisiana, which is Southeast Louisiana. And apparently all the proceeds go to the nonprofit organization, the South Louisiana Wetlands Discovery Center, which I thought was really cool. How that was connected was really interesting to me, and how, this area of Louisiana has embraced this legend, which, I'm sure was used, like I mentioned before, used to encourage those religious practices, and also, probably encourage curfew. Don't be up late if you don't want to get attacked by the rougarou. But yeah, if you look up the rougarou fest, there's It's like cool. It's almost like Halloween, Mardi Gras. It's kind of the vibe that I'm getting. You know, it's a celebration of the region, a costume festival, swamp zombies, ghosts, witches, the Rougarou, obviously, and Cajun food. So it's just, you know, a cool celebration of culture. Now moving to Mississippi, we have the Pascagoula River aliens, which I wasn't really expecting aliens when I was looking at Mississippi. I don't know. But apparently it's one of the most documented alien encounters in US history. And I believe there's even a plaque close to this area of the river where this occurred. But basically, on October 11th, 1973, 42-year-old Charles Hickson and 18-year-old Calvin Parker were fishing on the river. And they both described hearing a buzzing sound and claimed to see an egg-shaped craft with a pulsating blue light. And 3 creatures emerged from this craft and seemed to levitate rather than just walk. And they had, I thought this was interesting, they described crab-like pinchers and bullet-shaped heads, which, you know, if you think of typical aliens, you don't really think bullet when you think of those head shapes. Like, there's drawings of these creatures that they described, and they are they're more narrow than the traditional movie interpretation, like the gray aliens or the little green aliens. But they had bullet-shaped heads, pointed ears, 2 eyes, and a hole below the eyes. And both men felt paralyzed but were conscious when they were brought inside the craft. And they described being examined by a gadget that looked like a robotic eye before they were returned to the riverbank. This examination was described as a thorough medical type of examination. And it was reported that these men were hesitant to report this incident at first because, you know, obviously, if this happens to you, it is very outlandish. So that is understandable. But I was reading that Hickson admitted that after he was released from the craft, he had to have 3 shots of liquor, and then he gained the courage to go through with filing a report. And so they filed a report with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, and they were interviewed. Actually, 2 deputies left the 2 men alone in one of the rooms, and they had a hidden tape recorder that they were using in hopes to catch the men in a lie. But the men were having a conversation, and according to that tape, Hickson told Parker, "It scared me to death too. You can't get over it in a lifetime. Jesus Christ, have mercy." So they did not capture either of the men saying anything incriminating. And Captain Glenn Ryder, who was initially skeptical of the report, said he couldn't be for sure what actually happened to them, but was adamant that they had genuine fear when they came into the station, and they were good actors if it was a hoax. And the men ended up passing polygraph tests, although we know that these aren't always reliable, or it's not like the only thing you should rely on. This story was published in the newspaper and garnered a lot of attention from several other reporters and UFO investigators, or UAP. Am I supposed to say UAP now instead of UFO? And of course, this incident would lead to several other reports being filed in South Mississippi. Um, However, I did see that there had been other UFO reports in the area before their story broke. And years after this incident, Hickson would go on to appear on talk shows, give interviews. He even self-published a book in 1983 called UFO Contact at Pascagoula, which, I mean, like, I don't know, you might look at that and be like, not him trying to ride the coattails of this incident, but I mean, I don't know if this did happen to you, like, and people were always asking you about it, wanting to talk about it. I mean, it would make sense um, to write something. And his son ended up claiming that he just wanted to let people know that we are not alone in this world. And Parker described never really being able to escape the attention. And apparently, he had attended some UFO conventions and he was hypnotized by Bud Hopkins, which I guess was a prominent um, hypnotist. And his claims of the events that unfolded that night did not change. Although there is a UFO skeptic by the name of Philip Klass who believed the report was a hoax, claiming that some of Hickson's details had changed over the years. And Pascagoula actually has a dedicated historical marker that was actually created pretty recently on June 22nd, 2019, to commemorate the event. Now moving on to Georgia, where there is the Altamaha River in southeastern Georgia, and the cryptid that is said to occupy this river is called the Altamaha Ha, and this cryptid has origins with the lower Muskogee Creek tribe who occupied the area, and this creature is described as a large serpent, sturgeon-like creature. Kept seeing the measurement average length of 20 feet, grayish olive skin with lighter underbelly and rigid back, almost like armored plates. So the sturgeon resemblance there, with a narrow alligator shaped head. And also descriptions of flippers. So this creature is almost a combination of reptilian, fish, and mammalian features. And actually, the natives who occupied the area close to the river, they would describe this creature as almost being a guardian of the waterways. You know, serving as a warning to others who ventured too close to the area. And this cryptid has an obvious resemblance to the Loch Ness Monster, which isn't surprising because Scottish Highlanders that arrived in this area in 1736 would have been familiar with uh, the Loch Ness Monster. So there could have been, they heard about this legend and they were already primed for believing in a creature like this. So then they added on and spread the legend. So, like I said, this this creature originated with oral tales from the Muskogee natives, but also there was a newspaper report in 1830 describing an encounter from a crew of sailors. And over the decades since, there have been reports from timbermen, hunters, fishermen, and Boy Scouts describing this creature, this elusive creature, gliding through the water. Or I think there was one report where this man saw something stuck on the mud bank, and he also gave the alligator-like snout description. But there hasn't been any physical evidence of a creature like this existing. Again, eyewitness accounts. So no tracks, no scales, no bones. In 2018, there were actually odd remains found on Wolf Island National Wildlife Refuge. But this ended up being a hoax created by Zardulu, the myth maker, which this person is an artist, and these remains were actually created with paper mache and a stuffed shark. Based on the description of this creature, a lot of explanations are chalked up to alligator gar, sturgeons again, weird lighting and water trickery, some sort of log or debris, and there's actually something called pareidolia, the perception of seeing significant patterns or recognizable images in accidental arrangements of shapes and lines. But I really like when a region, or I really like when the local area can kind of celebrate their folklore, and there's actually they nicknamed this cryptid Alti, and there's a sculpture of Alti that was created in 2009 by Rick Spears that resides in the Darien Discover Center in the area. Okay, so now South Carolina. So the first cryptid that I kept seeing in association with this state is the scape or swamp lizard man, but I honestly don't think that's the most interesting cryptid that I found with this state. Because basically, the swamp lizard is just this teenage boy in the 80s. His car broke down on this stretch of road. He got out to, fix his tire, and he described seeing some bipedal, 7-foot tall reptilian man, red eyes and clawed hands, rushing to approach him in his car, and he claims that his car got attacked. And although he claimed that the lizard man wreaked some havoc on this car, but he only had a few scratches on his car, and there weren't actually like photos that were taken of this, even though he went to the police. And there was an investigator who had just suggested that a butterbean farmer in the area, Lucius Elmore, was the culprit. That he had some local thefts, and he heard the tire blow out, and he walked out onto the road to confront the person. So I don't really know how you would get a lizard man from just a guy, just a normal dude, just walking out. Maybe he just wanted a reason to explain the scratches on his car, because I don't know. But there's nothing else really notable about any other alleged lizard man sightings. But what I did find notable are actually 3 other cryptids. This one really creeped me out, actually. The concept of it is very unnerving. The third eye man, associated with the University of South Carolina in Columbia. So apparently there are service tunnels beneath Columbia, and the USC campus near, and specifically the sightings of this cryptid have been near the Longstreet Theater. And this cryptid was first reported in November 12th, 1949, where it was described as a man in bright silver was opening a manhole cover on the corner of Sumter and Green Streets opposite of Longstreet Theater. And on April 7th, 1950, University police actually came across two mutilated chickens behind Longstreet Theater, and they went back to their cruiser to report the scene, thinking some sort of fraternity shenanigans. But then when they returned to the scene, they claimed to see a pale man huddled over the chickens. And when one of the officers was shining his flashlight, the man looked up and had a third eye. Okay, the third eye is kind of throwing me off, but the concept of a silver, like, not like a tin man, but like a sickly, like, silver man just huddled over some chickens, that's pretty unsettling to me. In my mind, I kept thinking of, like, well, they're more like bat-like creatures because they live in a cave, but the creatures from The Descent, like that, those types of creatures, like humanoid enough, but they're still like these creatures, and it's just unsettling. And in the 1960s, some fraternity members had taken pledges down in the tunnel system. They claimed to see a crippled man in silver charging at them with a lead pipe. There were sightings in there were sightings in the late 80s and 90s, but mostly dismissed by university police. And my only thing with this is, like, these descriptions of seeing a man in silver, but then if you obviously there aren't photos of this man, because I was just imagining, like silver gray skin, but is he just wearing clothes? Or so that was a little unclear to me, but still I thought the idea is very unsettling. And another cryptid in South Carolina is the boo hag. So South Carolina's barrier islands and coastal communities are actually quite abundant with African culture. Um, the Gullah people are descendants of enslaved Africans who settled along the coastal regions of South Carolina and Georgia. And this boo hag actually blends African spiritual beliefs with Christian influences. And so this cryptid has origins with the Gullah Geechee Low Country folklore. Um, and it's said that this boo hag is kind of this skinless being that enters homes at night. Ugh, it's just creepy just talking about it. Skinless being. Um, and I saw the word haint come up when looking into this, and haint is like a restless spirit, I guess. So the boo hag, I saw it described as a skinless being, or a being that sheds its skin at night, and its spectral form enters your residence, um, sits on top of you, almost like sleep paralysis, so you'll feel like suffocating or overwhelming dread with this supernatural assault, and basically your life force like sucked out of you. You'll be exhausted in the morning, but it's not clear to you exactly why. And it's actually tradition to use blue paint to ward off haints, apparently, because the color, it resembles water or sky, and it's thought that that will confuse spirits and they wouldn't be able to cross. This kind of reminded me of the thing with the Rougarou, that if you put it, I saw that you could put like a hairbrush or maybe like a broom in your room, and apparently boohags are obsessive about numbers, so they won't be able to focus on anything until after they've counted all of the bristles, all um, the pieces of straw or whatever. And I was just like, what is this with like these entities and being confused or hyperfixated on counting? Okay, and now this last cryptid is more of a spirit, but the gray man of Polly's Island. So this one is unique because it's not a malicious entity or, you know, some other um, some like just a creature that's not really explained, but it's said to be a protective ghost. So there will be a man clad in gray, and unlike the sewer dweller that's described as a silver man, this ghost is wearing um, like a long coat and a hat, but he's adorned in gray. And so it's said that he appears before hurricanes and coastal storms. And this originates back to 1822 with a hurricane that struck Georgetown and Horry coast, the Horry County coastline. And this is said that a young man was traveling through the marsh on horseback visiting his fiancee, and he ended up dying in quicksand. And his fiancee described that she had a dream or some sort of vision where his spirit appeared and warned her of a looming storm, and he urged her family to evacuate, and most of Polly's Island was actually destroyed by this storm, and yet their house remained unscathed. And it's said that this gray man has been seen before Hurricane Hazel in 1954, before Hurricane Hugo in 1989, Hurricane Florence 2018, and Hurricane Ian in 2022. There's even an unsolved mystery segment about this gray man. But I like the idea that the spirit is providing, like, you know, a warning sign. He's not a malicious spirit that's trying to, kill you. I thought that was actually kind of wholesome, but still unsettling. The idea of a man in a long gray coat, and a hat, just seeing a man just wandering on the coastline, the stormy coastline. Um, okay, and lastly, we finally made it. We finally made it to Florida, and Loki. And Florida is the state where I thought the lizard man seemed more fitting. But no, we're back. We circled back to Bigfoot type creatures with Florida, because the one that I kept seeing come up the most was a skunk ape, and uh, this skunk ape creature is described as ape-like with reddish brown hair, and it's described as smaller than um, the northern depiction of Bigfoot, and it has more of an odor, like a sulfur smell, a rotten smell. And this skunk ape is said to thrive near swamps and wetlands, and there have been sightings in the Everglades and the Big Cypress National Preserve. Now, what's interesting about this is that there are photos of this cryptid um, that I think I have seen these before. I even was researching this as, included in Bigfoot, evidence of Bigfoot and that sort of thing. In December of 2000, the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office received photos from a woman claiming that this skunk ape was in her backyard. And apparently these images are known as the Mayaka skunk ape photos, and they got a lot of notoriety. A lot of newspapers began publishing stories, and this woman, it's just reported that she's unnamed, but she sent a letter in these photographs to the sheriff's office because she was so fed up that this creature was stealing apples off of her back porch. According to a column written by Stephen Otto of the Tampa Tribune, some of her letter included um, that her husband believed the creature was an orangutan and that she judged it being between 6 and 7 feet tall, and it had an awful smell, and the orangutan was making deep whoomp noises. With the notoriety of these photos, there have been investigators. The Bigfoot community, the Sasquatch Bigfoot community does not play, and the consensus that I saw is that the photos seem like a costume and most likely a hoax. And even if this was an escaped orangutan, it wouldn't be bipedal. So, yeah. But I made it to the end of this list, and I thought this was pretty fun doing a little deep dive. Took me down a lot of Reddit threads. But I thought this was interesting, and hopefully you guys did too.